When I parked my car in front of the upscale restaurant, my heart raced. I knew I shouldn't be there, that maybe it would be better to go home and pretend that everything was fine, but something inside me wouldn't let me go. There, among the shiny imported cars, I recognized the vehicle that I had seen leaving the garage of our house so many mornings. Her car. For a moment, I thought it was just a coincidence. But then, the memory of all those nights when she left saying she had late meetings, the quick and evasive messages, the excuses that didn't make sense, all those memories started to come together like pieces of a cruel puzzle. I knew that when I opened the door to that restaurant, I was about to discover a truth that could destroy me. I pushed open the glass door and was greeted by the soft sound of instrumental music, the buzz of low conversations and the smell of expensive dishes that perfumed the space. My gaze wandered around the room, anxious, almost desperate, until I saw them. She and him. Sitting at a corner table, their faces close, smiling as if the world around them didn't exist. Her fingers slid up his arm in a way I hadn't seen them do to me in years. I approached, trying to appear invisible, each step heavier than the last. As I got close enough to hear the laughter, my ears rang. They were so close, so intimate. My chest burned with the feeling of betrayal and anger. I stood a few meters away, so close that I could hear their words. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" His voice was soft, calm, as if he had all the control in the world. And she, with a smile that broke my heart, replied, "He has no idea." I had to hold myself back from losing control right then and there. I took a deep breath, felt my hands shaking and left before anyone noticed. I didn't know how, but I had to know more. I needed proof, I needed to understand how I got to this point without realizing that my entire life was falling apart. Over the next few days, every time she came out and gave me the same lame excuse, I had an ace hidden up my sleeve. A little piece of technology one put in her car, a tracker that would show me every place she went, every stop, every lie. From there, the game began. I followed her movements on my cell phone, watching the little ball move across the map, while trying to act like everything was normal. She would kiss me on the cheek and say, "I'll be back late," and I pretended to believe it. But inside, my blood boiled. It was a Wednesday when I saw the red dot on the map stop at the restaurant again. The scene repeated itself, but this time I wasn't just a man lost in the pain of watching his wife cheat on him. I had a plan. I arrived before her, asked for a table where I could observe without being seen, and waited. She came in smiling, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a while. And then, he appeared, with that confident look of someone who believes everything is under control. They sat down, ordered wine, laughed like teenagers in love. My stomach dropped, but I wasn't going to let the anger overwhelm me there. "So, is everything ready for tomorrow?" he asked, and for a second I held my breath, waiting for the answer. "Yes," she replied, a sparkle in her eyes, "we'll finally be able to get out of this and start fresh. He won't even know what happened." Each word was like a knife being plunged into my chest, but I didn't give up. I took out my cell phone and recorded everything, every word, every laugh, every touch. I didn't know whether to feel more angry at her, at him, or at myself for being so blind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about everything I heard, trying to find a way to put an end to that nightmare. But instead of confronting them there, I decided to wait, watch. If they thought I had no idea, it was because they were overconfident. And that would be their undoing. The following days were like a game of chess. I followed her every move, I knew every place where they were, the exact times when she said she was in a meeting and was actually in his arms. And me? I was there, in the darkness, watching everything and planning every step. It was then that, on a Friday night, I received a notification on my cell phone. Her car had stopped at a motel on the outskirts of town. That was the last straw. I ran to the car, driving like a madman, with my heart in my throat. When I arrived, I parked across the street and waited. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew something was going to change forever that night. Later, I saw them leaving, she laughing, holding his hand as if they were two teenagers running away from responsibilities. He pulled her closer and kissed her, without any shame, as if the whole world didn't matter. My heart broke for the 1000th time at that moment, and I felt my vision blurred by tears. But then, something unexpected happened. My cell phone vibrated with a new message. A message from her to him, full of plans and secrets that I had no idea about. They planned to leave the city, catch a flight the next morning and start life again somewhere else. Together. Leave everything behind, including myself. Tomorrow is the day, the message said. Finally free. Pain and anger mixed together in a way I had never felt before. But as I read those words, an idea began to form in my head. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tide before it was too late. I knew I didn't have much time, and every minute counted. They thought they had tricked me, that they had everything under control. But what they didn't know was that I was always one step ahead. And as dawn approached, a decision emerged, clear as ever. I was going to let them think they were in charge. That they would escape without any consequences. And the next morning, I would be there to watch it all fall apart. Because if there was one thing I had learned in that process, it was that the truth always finds a way to surface. And suddenly, the plan I was building started to make perfect sense. I knew the final showdown was coming. I knew I would have to face the pain and humiliation head-on, but this time, I wouldn't be the victim. They thought they were free, that they had gotten rid of me, but they were about to discover that the game was just beginning. And the question that kept echoing in my mind was, how far would you go to make someone feel the same pain as you? Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear, betrayal cannot be forgiven and will never be justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the message is real. Betrayal destroys lives, breaks hearts and leaves marks that time cannot erase. Now, get ready for an intense story full of twists and turns. A plot that will grip you from beginning to end and show how trust can be shattered in an instant. Catch your breath, because the story begins now. Thomas was in his office, looking out the window that overlooked the horizon, as the sun slowly hid behind the skyscrapers. He always found something calming about observing the chaotic movement of the city, as if it could calm the turmoil he sometimes felt inside. That afternoon, however, the calm I sought so much seemed unattainable. The image of his wife Emily's face hovered in his mind like a memory that refused to fade. Thomas and Emily had been married for almost a decade. Their relationship, which began as an overwhelming passion, had transformed into something more stable and, for him, deeper. They built a life together, with a comfortable home and nights of quiet dinners, where they share stories and plans for the future. Emily was the definition of a perfect companion for Thomas, charming, intelligent, and always one step ahead, both in her career and in life. She worked at a marketing agency and, despite the long hours, always found a way to balance her professional responsibilities with her personal life. Thomas admired that about her. For him, she was an example of dedication and strength. In the early years of their marriage, Thomas felt that nothing could shake what they had. They laughed at the same jokes, understood each other's eyes and built dreams together. He remembered the nights when they both came home from work exhausted, but still found the energy to cook together, drink a glass of wine, and plan trips they rarely took. They were simple moments, but they were theirs, and Thomas believed that was enough to keep them strong. However, the last few months brought a feeling he couldn't explain, like something had changed. Emily was still the same fascinating woman, but now, there was a distance between them. Thomas tried to ignore it, believing it was just a phase, one of those tides that all relationships face. After all, Emily's evening meetings had increased, as had her weekend work commitments. She said it was because of an important new account she was managing, and Thomas, with no reason to doubt, accepted. Still, I couldn't ignore the emptiness I felt when I was alone at home. It was as if a ghost hovered over him, whispering that there was something wrong, something he couldn't see. And that made him restless, irritable. During breakfast, I watched Emily get ready for work, elegant as always, and wanted to ask what was going on. But the courage never came. Deep down, I was afraid of the answers I might receive. Emily, for her part, seemed more distant than ever. Although she continued to be attentive, there was an air of mystery around her, as if she was always lost in thoughts she didn't share. When Thomas asked her about the reason for so much overtime, she smiled and said it was a difficult time at the agency, but that things would soon stabilize. There was something about the way she said it that bothered him, a kind of disinterest he didn't recognize in her. Thomas's office was in the city's financial center, where he ran a small consulting business. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it gave him pride. He had built the business from scratch, and it made him feel that, despite everything, he had control over his life. That afternoon, however, he couldn't concentrate on anything. His mind kept going back to Emily, to the vague excuses, to the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. It was then that his phone rang. It was one of his best friends, Jake, asking him for a drink after work. Jake was the kind of person who always knew how to ease the burden of a difficult day. With his carefree attitude and sarcastic jokes, he could make Thomas forget about any problem, even if it was just for a few hours. Thomas hesitated for a moment, but eventually accepted. Maybe a talk with Jake could clear his thoughts. They met in a discreet bar, one of those that were hidden between large buildings and that only the regulars knew about. Jake was already there, sitting in the corner, with 2 beers on the table. "You look terrible," he said bluntly as Thomas approached. "Thank you for your kindness, as always," Thomas replied, trying to force a smile. He sat down and picked up the beer, taking a long drink, as if that could wash away the feeling of restlessness that haunted him. "So what's going on?" Jake asked. "You've never been good at hiding when something bothers you." Thomas was silent for a moment, staring into his glass of beer. He didn't want to talk about it, but he knew he had to. "I don't know," he began. "It's just Emily. It feels like something has changed, and I can't understand what it is. She's been working really hard, and I'm not saying I don't trust her, but I feel like something is wrong." Jake frowned. "Do you think she's hiding something from you?" Thomas didn't respond immediately. "I don't know. Maybe it's just in my head. But I can't help but think about it." Jake nodded, trying to choose the right words. "Look, you know her better than anyone. If you think something is wrong, maybe you should talk to her. I know it's difficult, but dwelling on it won't solve anything." Thomas knew Jake was right, but still, the idea of confronting Emily made him nervous. "Maybe I'm just paranoid," he said, trying to convince himself. "She's always been honest with me. Maybe it's just work." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Recently, Emily was always distracted, looking at her cell phone and rushing to answer messages he never saw. Sometimes he would find her smiling at the screen, as if she was reading something funny, but when he asked, she would quickly change the subject or say it was a coworker. That night, when he got home, Emily was there, preparing dinner. It was a scene that always brought him comfort, but this time, there was a heaviness in the air. He watched her as she cut the vegetables, her movements precise and methodical, and he couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. "How was work?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Exhausting, as always," she replied, without taking her eyes off the cutting board. "But I think we're close to getting a big contract. It's going to be worth it." Thomas wanted to believe her, wanted to convince himself that there was nothing more to it, that everything was fine. But when she turned to him and smiled, something in her eyes made him question. There was a coldness there, something he had never seen before. While they were eating dinner, he tried to make conversation, talking about trivial things, but the conversation didn't flow like it used to. She was there, but at the same time she wasn't. And Thomas felt the emptiness grow inside him, as if he were trying to hold water in his hands and it was slipping through his fingers. After dinner, Emily said she needed to do some things on the computer and disappeared into the office. Thomas was left alone in the room, looking at the TV screen without really seeing what was on. And that's when the idea came up. If he wanted answers, he needed to do something about it. And he knew exactly where to start. The feeling that he was about to enter dangerous territory kept him from sleeping that night. But the decision was made. The next morning, he would leave the house with a smile on his face, as he always did, but he would return with a plan. Thomas spent the next few days in a state of restlessness that he could not hide. The idea of confronting Emily directly tormented him, but doubt and distrust grew every night she said she needed to go out to run errands or work late. He decided he could no longer ignore the overwhelming feeling that something was happening, so he decided to take action. He installed a small tracker in Emily's car, something discreet that allowed him to monitor her every move without her noticing. That decision made him feel torn. A part of him felt guilty, as if he was betraying Emily's trust by spying on her, but the other, stronger part, justified his actions as a desperate need for answers. When the tracker started showing the places where Emily went, Thomas felt a kind of relief and tension at the same time. For a few days, her route seemed ordinary, between work and the casual appointments she always mentioned. But one Thursday night, when Emily said she had an important business dinner and asked him not to wait up for her, the tracker revealed an unexpected destination, a residential neighborhood on the other side of town. Thomas saw the dot on the map stop around 8 in the evening and not move for hours. He stared at the screen, his heart beating fast, trying to find a logical explanation for this, but no explanation seemed plausible. The weekend was approaching, and Thomas knew he needed more than a dot on a map to confirm his suspicions. He began to plan, as if he were putting together a puzzle whose pieces only he could put together. Over the next few nights, he paid attention to every word Emily said, looking for any slip-up, any sign that could betray her. And then, on Monday, he saw the opportunity he needed. Emily entered the kitchen early in the morning, already dressed to go out, and casually mentioned that she would need to work late again, that there was a meeting with an important client at a restaurant near the center. Thomas watched her as she spoke, trying to pick up on something in her tone that revealed insecurity, but she seemed calm, unconcerned. He knew this would be the night. She barely waited for Emily to go out to get her car keys and follow her discreetly, keeping a safe distance. The tracker indicated that she was heading to the same location as the previous week. When he saw her car parked in front of a residential building, his chest tightened, and anger mixed with sadness invaded him in a way he had never experienced before. He parked a few meters away and watched, his heart racing, his eyes fixed on the building's entrance. The clock seemed to tick slowly. Minutes turned into hours, and Thomas stood there, trying to think of how he was going to deal with this. Until, around 10 at night, he saw the door of the building open and a familiar figure come out. It was Emily, laughing, with her hair down and a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a while. Beside her, a man Thomas had never seen. Tall, well-dressed, with a smile that radiated self-confidence. They talked for a moment on the sidewalk and then he saw something that made his heart stop. The man leaned over to Emily and kissed her, an intimate, familiar kiss, and she kissed back without hesitation. Thomas felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over him. He blinked several times, as if his eyes might have played a cruel trick on him, but the scene was still there, as real as it was painful. Emily and the man stood still for a moment, as if the world around them didn't exist, and then they said goodbye with a smile, as if they had all the time in the world to replay that moment. Thomas watched them as she got into the car and the man waved, before turning his back and disappearing into the darkness of the street. The drive home was a blur for Thomas. He drove without really seeing where he was going, his mind replaying the scene like a movie he couldn't stop watching. His hands on the steering wheel were shaking, and he felt an unbearable mixture of anger, humiliation and helplessness. When he arrived home, the house seemed strangely silent, as if sensing the collapse that was coming. Thomas walked in and plopped down on the couch, still trying to process what he had seen. He wanted to scream, to destroy something, but instead he just sat there, staring into space. His suspicions had been confirmed, but the confirmation did not bring the relief he had hoped for. On the contrary, it was as if an open wound had been exposed, and there was nothing he could do to ease the pain. The questions began to come in a whirlwind. Since when was this happening? Who was that man? And, more importantly, what would he do from now on? That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He lay awake, going over every detail of their relationship, trying to find the moments when everything started to fall apart. And as the dawn progressed, the darkness around him only seemed to grow. He realized he needed answers. Not just to confront Emily, but to understand how someone he loved so much had become a stranger. The sound of the alarm clock rang in the morning, cutting through the silence that dominated the house, and he realized that Emily was no longer in bed. When he went down to the kitchen, he found her preparing coffee, as if it were just another ordinary day. And there, standing at the entrance, he felt the weight of betrayal manifest itself in the form of a lump in his throat, which almost prevented him from speaking. But he knew he couldn't let that go. He needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on Emily, and when she raised her eyes and met his, for a second, he saw a shadow of uncertainty. And then, bluntly, he asked, "Do you want to tell me where you were last night?" Emily stopped, surprised, but quickly recovered. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. Thomas watched her face for any sign of regret, but found none. "I told you, it was a work meeting," she replied, with a calmness he couldn't understand. He nodded slowly, anger beginning to bubble beneath the surface. "Then why were you kissing that man on the way out?" Emily's expression instantly changed. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing the discomfort and surprise beneath. She blinked, searching for something to say, but the words seemed to slip out. Thomas knew he didn't need anything else. He had seen enough. And there, in the middle of that kitchen that had once seemed so welcoming, he felt as if the world he knew had silently collapsed, without warning. The betrayal was exposed, raw and painful, but Thomas knew that was just the beginning. And as Emily tried to explain herself, he realized there was something more, something she hadn't told him yet. Thomas felt the weight of the last few weeks piled up on his shoulders, as if gravity itself had intensified. Ever since confronting Emily and hearing her evasive answers, he knew he couldn't fool himself anymore. The betrayal was there, exposed, but there were still pieces missing to put together the complete puzzle. Still, he noticed that Emily seemed unafraid of being discovered. On the contrary, she showed a coldness he had never seen before, as if betrayal wasn't the worst secret she was hiding. After that initial confrontation in the kitchen, Thomas decided he needed to go further. He monitored Emily's every step, her messages, her calls, and the places she went. He felt like a detective of his own life, but it was either that or give in to despair. One thing kept him awake at night, the message he intercepted on her cell phone. It was from her lover, and it said, "Everything is ready for tomorrow. We meet at 7 a.m. in the same house. The flight is at 10 a.m. Thomas's heart sank when he read that. It was a plan. Emily and her lover were about to leave him behind, abandon everything they had built together and disappear. He had a decision to make: confront Emily once again or follow their plan and discover the full truth for himself. Thomas chose the second option. He could no longer trust her words, he needed to see it with his own eyes. That night, he pretended to go to sleep early, as if he was exhausted from the tension of the last few days. Emily cautiously watched him from afar, waiting until he was lying down before picking up her bag and leaving the house. Thomas waited a few minutes and then followed her, keeping enough distance so as not to be noticed. He felt like he was about to cross a threshold from which he could never come back, but the need for answers pushed him forward. Emily drove through town in silence, stopping at a small, modest house that seemed uninhabited at first glance. Thomas parked a little further back and watched. A few minutes later, the man he had seen kissing Emily appeared, walking through the door as if he owned the place. Thomas took a deep breath and got out of the car, ready to face whatever was happening once and for all. He approached the house silently, looking for a window where he could see without being seen. What he saw made his blood run cold. Emily and the man were in the middle of the room, laughing, with an intimacy that broke Thomas's heart into 1,000 pieces. But that wasn't the only thing that scared him. On the table, he could see open suitcases, scattered documents, and what looked like a pile of money. Emily held some papers and handed them to the man, who examined them with a satisfied smile. "It's all here," she said, and for the first time that night, Thomas heard her voice without the mask she wore at home. "Once we take off, no one will be able to track us. It'll be a new beginning, away from all this hell." "You're brilliant, you know that," the man responded, caressing her face. "I never thought we could do all this without him getting suspicious." Thomas felt like he had been punched. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal, there was something darker and more calculated. He turned away from the window for a moment, his chest burning, trying to control the anger and sadness that threatened to boil over. When he looked again, Emily was on the phone, speaking quietly but clearly nervous. "Yes, everything is fine. He doesn't suspect anything. Tomorrow at 7. We just need him to be at the airport to take care of the boarding. Thomas has heard enough." He got back in the car and drove back home with his head spinning. It was clear that Emily and her lover were planning something bigger than running away together. But what exactly were they aiming for? And who else was involved? Those questions wouldn't leave his mind, and he knew the only way to find out was to confront them. The next morning, Thomas woke up before the sun rose. He was decided. Instead of waiting for Emily to leave to fulfill his plans, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He woke her up with breakfast, like they used to do in the first years of their marriage. She seemed confused, surprised, but accepted the gesture. "You don't seem too worried today," she commented, trying to sound casual. Thomas smiled, but his eyes didn't reflect joy. "I decided it was time to stop acting like everything was fine," he replied. "We need to talk, Emily." She stopped, visibly tense, and Thomas noticed. For a moment, he felt a flash of fear in her eyes, but it was soon replaced by a neutral expression. "Of course." "About what?" "About last night. About what I saw." Emily was silent, and Thomas could see her mind working, trying to find a way out of the situation. But he wasn't going to let her get away this time. "I know you weren't in a business meeting, Emily. And I know you and that man are planning something for today. So why don't you save me the trouble and tell me already?" The silence that followed seemed endless. Finally, Emily took a deep breath and spoke, in a voice Thomas barely recognized. "You don't understand, Thomas. I needed to do this. We needed this." "What do you need?" Thomas asked, his voice louder than he intended. "Money. A new beginning." "What, Emily? What is so important that you decided to destroy everything we had?" Emily stood up, as if she were about to leave the room, but then stopped and turned to him, her face tense, almost trembling. "You think you know everything, don't you? That life is simple, that people are simple. But it's not. I did what I needed to survive." Thomas looked at her, confused. "Survive what? What are you talking about?" It was then that she broke down. The tears began to flow, but not of guilt or regret, they were tears of frustration, of someone who had held a secret for too long. "You think you know everything about me, but I had to hide it to protect you, and to protect myself." "Protect me? From what?" Thomas asked, completely lost. Emily took a deep breath, as if she was about to reveal something that would change everything. "From the man I was with yesterday. He's not just a lover, Thomas. He's my accomplice. We've been embezzling money from your company for months." The words felt like a shot. Thomas blinked, trying to process. What? What are you saying? That's what you heard, she said, her voice firmer now. I found a way to redirect funds, and it helped me hide it. We were going to use this money to start a new life somewhere else, far away from here. But it wasn't just for us, it was to get out from under someone's control, much more dangerous than you realize. I just didn't think you'd find out before I could sort it all out. Thomas felt the world spin. The pieces finally fell into place, but in a way he could never have imagined. Emily didn't just cheat on him, she deceived him, manipulated his company, and all while pretending to be the woman he knew and loved. And now, the revelation was there, naked and raw, with no chance of being denied. And you think I'm going to let you guys run away like that? He asked, anger bubbling. After everything? Emily looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a look of genuine despair. I have no other choice, Thomas. I wish things were different. But now, you know everything. And that changes everything. Thomas closed his eyes, trying to control the storm of emotions that invaded him. But he knew the truth had finally emerged. And that was just the beginning of a confrontation that was far from over. Thomas felt the room around him close in, as if the air had become thick and difficult to breathe. Emily's revelation had been devastating, but now, he needed to quickly process what it all meant. For years, he believed that their love, even though weathered by time, was strong enough to withstand anything, but now, the truth was coming out with a brutality he could never have predicted. Emily, the woman he thought he knew so well, had concocted a complex, cold, and cynical plan to embezzle money from the company he built. And, worse, he had done it alongside another man. She was there, in front of him, crumbling under the weight of her own confession, but still trying to hold herself together, as if there was some justification that could be used to lessen the damage. Thomas looked at her, trying to find a way to react without losing control, but he didn't know how. The moral dilemma was plaguing him. He felt a part of him screaming to act with revenge, to expose everything she did and make sure she paid for what he did, while another part just wanted it all to be a nightmare and that he could wake up and find Emily by his side, just like before. When everything seemed normal. You have no idea what this did to me, he finally said, his voice shaking, filled with a bitterness he couldn't hide. I trusted you, and you destroyed everything. Not only our marriage, but also the only thing I fought to build. How could you do that? Emily flinched a little, as if his words had hit her physically. I know, she murmured, eyes downcast, avoiding looking at him directly. I know it sounds horrible, and I'm not trying to justify what I did, but, you don't understand what I was going through. Then make me understand. Thomas screamed, unable to hold back the explosion. Because all I see now is a woman who lied to me, who planned to run off with another man and leave my life in ruins. Emily took a deep breath, fighting to maintain her composure. I was trapped, Thomas. You don't know what it's like to live every day feeling like, at any moment, everything could fall apart. I got involved in this because I thought it would be a way to finally have control over my own life, of escaping something you can't even imagine. And when I realized how far I had gone, it was too late. Control, he repeated in disbelief. You wanted control, so you decided to rob the person who trusted you most. And how does this man get into all this? Who is he, and why did you need him to do this? She hesitated before answering, as if the words were difficult to come out. He was a way to escape, she admitted, her voice low. He knew how to move money without leaving a trace, and he promised me that we could get out of here, start a new life without having to look back. I know it seems crazy now, but at the time, it seemed like the only solution. Thomas was silent, processing each word. The moral dilemma that tormented him grew every moment. Part of him wanted to hear more, try to understand how it had started and how everything could have been different. But the other, more cruel part, wanted to hold on to the hatred, use it as fuel to destroy any trace of feeling he might have for her. He knew that the decision he would make in the next few moments would define not only their future, but the very way he would see himself from now on. "You say it was to survive, that it was a way to have control," he said, his voice firm but brittle. "But what about me? Where do I come into this? Was I just an obstacle? An idiot you thought you could fool into getting what you wanted?" Emily finally looked up, and for the first time, he saw genuine tears, not of frustration, but of pain. "I never wanted to hurt you, Thomas," she whispered. "Never. But I was lost. And through it all, I made terrible choices. I just wanted to run away, and he offered me a way out." "A way out," he repeated, the words heavy, almost in disbelief. "Run away. As if everything we built together was a prison for you." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Emily had no more answers, no more justifications. She just stood there, watching the man she loved crumble into frustration and anger. And then, unexpectedly, Thomas did something she didn't expect. He walked away, grabbed his coat and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice shaking, full of fear. "I'm going to end this the way I should have from the beginning," he said, without looking back. "There are no more lies to hide, Emily. Do you think you're trapped? You have no idea what it's really like to be trapped. I'm going to expose everything, and then we'll see who can escape." She tried to reach for him, perhaps to stop him from leaving, but she hesitated, stopping midway. He felt his heart race at the thought that once he walked through that door, there would be no turning back. "Thomas, please wait. We can work this out. We can find a way out of this together." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, and finally turned to face her. "Together? How can you say that now? You destroyed any chance of something we could trust each other with. And I won't let you use that as an excuse to drag me into your chaos." She realized his mind was made up, and the panic began to turn into despair. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know I was wrong. But if you tell everything now, not only will I pay the price. You will destroy the company you built, everything you worked for. Is that what you want?" The question stopped Thomas for a moment. It was true. He had the power to expose everything and ensure Emily's betrayal didn't go unpunished, but that would also mean compromising the company, the employees, and, ultimately, the life he'd built. It was a sacrifice he hadn't expected to make, and the weight of the choice was pulling him down like an unbearable burden. But then he realized it wasn't just about exposing the truth or keeping up appearances. It was about recovering something he had lost a long time ago, his dignity. And with that in mind, he looked at Emily one last time, and said, with a calm that hid the deep pain he felt, "No matter what happens, I will take back what is mine. And if you have to destroy everything you built on lies, then so be it." Thomas left, leaving Emily alone, terrified of the consequences that were beginning to emerge in her mind. Uncertainty consumed her, and she knew that no matter how hard she tried, there was no longer any way to avoid what was coming. As he walked through the streets, her words still echoed in his mind. He wondered if he really was prepared to deal with everything he had discovered and what he was about to do. But one thing was certain, he would no longer be a victim, not after everything. The final confrontation between Thomas and Emily did not take place in private, but rather in front of a packed courtroom, where all the lies, cheating and betrayal were exposed in a raw and irrefutable way. When Thomas left the house that morning, there was no longer any doubt about what he would do. He sought out his lawyers and presented all the evidence he had gathered against Emily and her accomplice. The photos, the bank records, the intercepted messages, everything was catalogued and used to incriminate not only Emily, but also the lover who had helped orchestrate the embezzlement scheme. In court, Emily sat next to her lawyer, visibly haggard and lacking the confidence she once displayed. Thomas, on the other hand, was firm, but his gaze reflected a deep sadness. He wasn't there for revenge, but to restore a sense of justice that had been ripped away from him. During the entire process, he never looked away from Emily, perhaps hoping to find some regret in her eyes, but all he saw was the reflection of a woman who had been trapped by her own actions. When the verdict was given, it was as if a life sentence had been issued. Emily and her accomplice were found guilty of fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to several years in prison, while her lover, who tried to bargain with information in exchange for a lighter sentence, was also unable to escape severe punishment. The promises of a new and prosperous life together turned into ruins, a dream destroyed by greed and betrayal. Emily looked at Thomas one last time before being escorted out of the courtroom. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there were no more words she could say. Perhaps she was hoping for some kind of forgiveness, a last chance at redemption, but all she saw was the steady, distant gaze of a man she had lost forever. And in that moment, she finally understood the weight of her choices, not just the legal impact, but the void she had created by destroying the only relationship that truly mattered. Thomas left the courtroom feeling a mix of relief and emptiness. The truth had been revealed, and those who tried to ruin his life would now face the consequences. But at the same time, he felt a pain that would not be easily erased. The scars left by betrayal were deep, and he knew that no matter how much he had sought justice, there was no real victory there. His life was shattered, and the feeling of loss accompanied him with every step he took away from the court. The next day, Thomas walked into his company's headquarters for the first time since the whole scandal broke. He knew the news had spread, and the employees looked at him with a mix of sympathy and concern. Many feared for the company's future, and it was understandable. But Thomas had no intention of letting the legacy he built fall apart because of other people's mistakes. He called a meeting and, with a firm voice, told everyone that the company would restructure, that he had a plan to overcome the crisis and that, together, they would be able to move forward. Little by little, he managed to regain the trust of those who had doubted that the company would survive the storm. His decisions were calculated and precise, driven by a renewed strength he found in realizing that, even after all the devastation, he still had control over his own destiny. The man who left that court was not the same man who had discovered the betrayal, but someone stronger, more resilient. He lost a lot, but not everything, and that was what motivated him to keep going. As for Emily, the years in prison were hard and unforgiving. Without Thomas's support, without the security of a comfortable life, she was forced to face her mistakes in the isolation of a cold cell. There, the promises of a new life with her lover became a bitter memory, a constant reminder of how she had exchanged something real for a fleeting illusion. Loneliness was her only company, and the letters she wrote to Thomas, begging for forgiveness, were never answered. Time in prison forced her to reflect on every choice, every lie, and she finally understood that there was no justification that could erase the damage she caused. Meanwhile, Emily's once arrogant and confident lover also faced his consequences. After trying to shift all the blame onto her, he was betrayed by his own defense. He ended up paying a heavy price for his attempt to manipulate the situation, receiving a sentence that ensured he would spend many years behind bars, where his influence and charm could not protect him. Years later, Thomas rebuilt his life, slowly but determinedly. He didn't love again like he loved Emily, but he learned to find value in his own company, to value the freedom and peace he conquered. Over time, he began to travel, rediscovering the world outside the bubble he had created. The pain of betrayal was still a bitter memory, but it no longer defined him. What he had, above all, was a second chance to reinvent himself. On the last day of the trial, a reporter asked him how he felt seeing his ex-wife and her lover finally receiving their sentences. Thomas, who has always avoided speaking to the press, replied only one thing: "I feel free." Because, for him, this was the biggest victory. The freedom to move forward, without the shadows of lies and betrayals to drag you back. And so, the story closed. Emily lost everything, including the chance to redeem herself in Thomas's eyes. And he, despite carrying the weight of everything he had experienced, managed to find a way to rebuild his life. Their story was marked by pain, but also by hard lessons and the certainty that the truth, however difficult it may be to face, is always the only path to true liberation. If you made it this far, tell us what you thought of this story. What is your opinion about the choices each person made? We want to know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, we make it clear, betrayal is never justifiable. It destroys lives, relationships and leaves deep marks. See you in the next story.